I'm Matt McClure, and this is Currents. The Palestinian bid for statehood runs into a wall of criticism and threats of veto. We'll have the latest from the UN and expert analysis. Plus, does President Obama's debt plan have a prayer in Congress?
I will not support any plan that puts all the burden for closing our deficit on ordinary Americans.
Tax increases, I think, are off the table, and I don't think they're a viable option for the Joint Committee.
And blessed are the businessmen? We'll take you to a local talk on the Beatitudes of business.
Our hope is that we can help instill Christian values so that they find ways to express their Christian values in their work setting in a way that's appropriate and inspirational for other people.
Well, good evening. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. President Obama was in New York today to address the United Nations General Assembly, with many eagerly anticipating his thoughts on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In his address, the president urged the Palestinian Authority to drop their bid to gain statehood through the UN, arguing that the Palestinian people deserve a state, but that a vote in the UN was not the right way to accomplish their goal.
1 year ago, I stood at this podium and I called for an independent Palestine. I believed then and I believe now that the Palestinian people deserve a state of their own. But what I also said is that a genuine peace can only be realized between the Israelis and the Palestinians themselves. 1 year later, despite extensive efforts by America and others, the parties have not bridged their differences.
Now, later on in the day, Obama met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, telling him the bonds between the U.S. and Israel are unbreakable. Well, for more on this, we're now joined by Father Elias Mallon. He is the Education and Interreligious Affairs Officer with the Catholic Near East Welfare Association. He's also a member of the UN Israel-Palestine Working Group. Father Mallon, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Well, first of all, kind of boil this down for us and put this into a bit of context with regard to the Palestinian bid for statehood. Why now, and why are they going through the UN to try and do this rather than, as the president suggested should happen today, kind of work this out between themselves and the Israelis?
Well, there's a couple of things there. One, they have been trying to work it out for 40 years and it hasn't worked. And secondly, basically what they are trying to do is to get membership in the United Nations. Now, there's already a good number of countries that recognize Palestine as a nation and have embassies in Ramallah. But right now, the status of the Palestinian delegation at the United Nations is they are an observer entity, and they're the only group in the world. For example, the Holy See is a non-member observer state, and and being a non-member observer state brings with it certain privileges and obligations which do not accrue to a group that is an entity. And so what they're trying to do is to get recognized by the United Nations so that they can function within the world community.
Sure, sure. And as the president suggested there, and as I alluded to, the president said there's no shortcut in this process. You said that this process has actually been going on for some, 40 years or so. But the Palestinians and the Israelis have to work things out for themselves is basically what the president said. Would you agree that, or is that even feasible at this point, given the fact that this has been going on for as long as you say?
Well, I don't see. First of all, of course they have to work things out. I mean, if the United Nations were to declare them a full member state tomorrow, that's still not going to solve the problems. And so I really don't see the argument, they have to work it out among themselves, as being a valid argument. Of course they do. but it might actually work, the solution might work better if they came to the table as two equals, which they are definitely not now, namely the State of Israel and the State of Palestine.
Sure.
So that actually, if the Palestinians get recognized as I don't think they're going to get a full member status, because I think the United States will veto that on the level of the Security Council. But on the level of the General Assembly, I think, and to be honest, I hope they get non-member observer state status. Then they come to the table with the Israelis as equals. Right now, they're an entity, and an occupied entity at that.
Yeah. And as you said there, the U.S. has been threatening to veto this if it makes it before the Security Council this week. What would that do? What would a U.S. veto of this do to relations between the U.S. and Palestinians, and the sort of the role of the U.S. that has been unfolding over the past several decades, of the U.S. sort of trying to be a moderator in this debate and in this struggle between those two peoples?
I think whatever credibility the United States has left as being a neutral partner in that would be lost, which I don't think is a major surprise to the Palestinians, because they have become increasingly disillusioned. For example, the illegal settlements in the occupied territories, which are by all international law illegal. You cannot colonize occupied territory. They have increased during these negotiations, and they were not even frozen, much less dismantled. They increased, and so that the Palestinians, I think, have understandably lost confidence in the United States' neutrality in the conflict and its credibility in the negotiations.
All right. Well, Father Elias Mallon, the Education and Interreligious Affairs Officer with CNEWA, the Catholic Near East Welfare Association. We thank you so much. Just out of time, but thank you for coming on and talking about this very important issue today. Really appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, stay with us. There is much more currents ahead. Free at last. 2 Americans in Iran are released from prison. We'll have that story and the rest of the day's headlines next. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Matt McClure. Coming up in just a bit, a group of businessmen get a lesson in the Beatitudes. First, though, let's have a look at the day's headlines. After 2 years of waiting, the remaining 2 jailed U.S. hikers in Iran have been freed. Shane Bauer and Josh Fatal were arrested along with Sarah Shord back in 2009 while hiking near the unmarked Iran-Iraq border, and they were sentenced to 8 years in jail. Shord was later released due to health concerns. Now the release of Bauer and Fatal comes just days after Washington's Cardinal Theodore McCarrick returned from Iran. He was there with a delegation of U.S. Christian and Muslim leaders attempting to secure the hikers' release. I'll speak with Cardinal McCarrick on tomorrow's show. The execution of a Georgia death row inmate was still on schedule for tonight after a judge denied a request to have him take a polygraph test. Troy Davis was convicted in the 1989 murder of a Georgia police officer. There have been many calls to grant him clemency, including from Pope Benedict. In a letter, the Pope's envoy to the U.S. asked officials in Georgia to consider the special circumstances of the case, those being a lack of physical evidence and the fact that the murder weapon was never found. The Vatican today announced that Pope Benedict has accepted the resignation of the Archbishop of Indianapolis for health reasons. Archbishop Daniel B. Klein is 73. He's 2 years short of the mandatory retirement age for a bishop. He's had a number of health issues over the past couple of years, including cancer and a stroke. The Vatican has not named B. Klein's replacement. Well, meanwhile, Pope Benedict has chosen 2 new men to oversee the Vatican's finances. Rome Reports has details.
Benedict XVI appointed Giuseppe Versaldi as the new president of the Prefecture for Economic Affairs of the Vatican. He'll take over the post recently held by Cardinal Velasio de Paolis, who left the post because of age limit restrictions. The new secretary of this department will now be Spanish priest Lucio Ángel Vallejo Balda. The Prefecture for Economic Affairs doesn't directly administer the Vatican's finances. Rather, it oversees all its activities. For example, it's in charge of checking the Holy See's balance sheets, budgets, and financial audits.
Cardinal Velasio de Paolis, who you heard about there in that piece, he's the retiring president of the Vatican's Prefecture for Economic Affairs. He'll remain in his post, though, as the Pope's special delegate to the Legionnaires of Christ. Well, turning now to Russia, where the city of Moscow has demolished a hospice built by the Missionaries of Charity, the order founded by Mother Teresa. Asia News reporting the hospice was destroyed because it did not have the proper permits. The Russian Orthodox Church tried to reach a compromise to keep the hospice standing. The demolition comes at the same time that Moscow is preparing to unveil a statue of Mother Teresa. When it comes to God and the economy, a new survey shows that Americans do not necessarily think the two are mutually exclusive. The survey from Baylor University shows that a majority of Americans who believe God has a plan for them also believe the government does too much to try to fix the economy. The number changes dramatically for people who do not think that God has a plan for them. Just slightly more than a fifth of that group believes the government does too much. And a Catholic woman in Los Angeles is not winning any popularity contests among her neighbors. They're upset about the nearly 25-foot cross on the woman's front lawn. The Los Angeles Daily News reporting city inspectors are assessing the situation to determine if the cross complies with zoning rules. The woman says the cross is an expression of her Catholic faith, and she hopes her religious freedom will be protected. Stay with us. There's more currents ahead. Coming up, President Obama wants to raise taxes on millionaires, but Republicans in Congress say no way. We'll boil down the debt discussion. Welcome back. Well, when it comes to raising taxes on the wealthy, President Obama can count one group of clergy in his corner. The group, made up of 75 religious representatives from different denominations, sent a letter to the Republican members of a congressional supercommittee that's currently trying to hammer out a plan to cut the federal deficit. The clergy say the congressmen have a, quote, moral responsibility to restore the country's fiscal health without worsening the immediate economic struggles of American families. Well, that's a message that echoes the one sent by President Obama earlier this week. We get more on that from CNN's Jessica Yellen.
Never mind about debt and deficits. This Rose Garden speech was largely about politics.
I will not support any plan that puts all the burden for closing our deficit on ordinary Americans.
Burned after the summer's debt deal with Speaker Boehner fell apart, the president is throwing down the gauntlet with a veto threat.
I will veto any bill that changes benefits for those who rely on Medicare but does not raise serious revenues by asking the wealthiest Americans or biggest corporations to pay their fair share.
For the Congressional Supercommittee, that sounds like a recipe for gridlock, since Speaker Boehner drew this line in the sand last week.
Tax increases, I think, are off the table, and I don't think they're a viable option for the Joint Committee.
Here's what the White House is proposing. More than $3 trillion in additional savings over 10 years by raising $1.5 trillion in tax revenues, saving $1.1 trillion from winding down the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, trimming $580 billion from government programs, more than half in savings from Medicare and Medicaid, and saving $430 billion in interest. They also want tax reform to include a, quote, principle they call the Buffett rule, named after billionaire Warren Buffett.
If you're among those fortunate few in the United States, we should make sure you pay as a share of income and taxes more than what a middle-class family pays.
Senior congressional Republican sources tell me this proposal is a non-starter. The White House is gearing up to blame the GOP.
The Speaker says we can't have it my way or the highway, and then basically says my way or the highway.
The president's already setting a course for campaign 2012, attempting to position himself as a defender of the middle class against a Republican Party he'd cast as a protector of the wealthy.
I believe the American middle class, who've been pressured relentlessly for decades, believe it's time that they were fought for as hard as the lobbyists and some lawmakers have fought to protect special treatment for billionaires and big corporations.
The president's veto threat is likely to have some effect on the Congressional Supercommittee. For example, if Republicans were hoping to do all entitlement cuts with no tax increases, this could make them think again.
And that is CNN's Jessica Yellen reporting there. Stay tuned, there's more Currents coming up. When we return, the Beatitudes and business. How do the two work together? We'll find out.
Even as we become successful, how do we remain poor in spirit? How do we keep true to the mission that Jesus challenged us to live our lives in a life of love?
Well, finally tonight, maybe the answers to the country's dire financial straits are not only found in economic textbooks and account ledgers. Consider this, a group of local businessmen took time out this week to crack open another book, the Good Book, in fact, and examine Jesus' message in the Sermon on the Mount. We sent our cameras to the Bishop Malloy Retreat House in Jamaica, Queens to check it out.
Give me some misguided helpfulness, those who intrude upon my privacy.
We have people who are teachers, businessmen, a number of engineers. And the idea is, our hope is that we can help instill Christian values so that they find ways to express their Christian values in their work setting in a way that's appropriate and inspirational for other people. So every year we pick a particular topic, and this year the retreat for the weekend is the Beatitudes.
And after he sat down, his disciples came to him and he began to teach them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Even as our incomes grow and even as we become successful, how do we remain poor in spirit? How do we keep true to the mission that Jesus challenged us to live our lives in a life of love? I know it's a stretch. I know it's a stretch on putting a spiritual component to what we do in business. But when you really understand that you're in a position to help someone else be successful, it is a more spiritual-oriented activity than just gaining that sale. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the land.
I think a great portion of my life, I try very hard to live in humility. And I think that's probably the most important thing for me that I take from the Beatitudes is that, it's just important for me to not have a lot of swagger in life.
Blessed are the merciful. What's another word for mercy? Compassion. Compassion. Nursing was a tremendous field of study from that perspective, to really understand the human condition and really understand what people are going through.
One of the reasons why we started this organization 20 years ago was because at that point there was a lot of us, including myself, was out of work. And we started because men usually don't network as easily and as effectively as women. That's my own personal observation.
A number of the retreatants here have actually been in career transition, which is how they usually have found their way, or the Holy Spirit helped them find the retreat as a setting to help them spur themselves on to either a new job or new career success.
I think what I've known of some of these men through the years too is they do a tremendous job of helping to support each other through those desert periods, and they really are true to their faith. Blessed are they who mourn, for they will be comforted.
So as businessmen, as individuals, we face mourning, we lose jobs, we lose friends, we lose opportunities in our career. So we mourn, but we're going to be blessed and we're going to be comforted, and I believe that.
Well, that is it for this particular edition of Currents. Now, coming up tomorrow, the 2 remaining U.S. hikers who were jailed in Iran, well, they've been set free today. Washington Cardinal Theodore McCarrick was part of a delegation to Iran attempting to secure the release of the hikers. I spoke with him about the latest news. We'll be bringing you that interview coming up on tomorrow night's show. Until then, though, be sure and visit us online over at currentsny.net. We're also on Facebook and on Twitter. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Matt McClure. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great night.